My wife, Sarah, found the house. She said it was a steal, a 3-bedroom ranch on a full acre way out in the sticks of central Pennsylvania. We'd been living in a cramped apartment in Harrisburg, and with our son, Caleb, about to turn 5, she wanted space. I wanted a garage. We both got what we wanted. The realtor was a quiet guy named Mr. Hemlock. He didn't talk much during the walkthrough, just stood by the front door with his hands behind his back. When I asked him about the previous owners, he just said they'd moved south. That was it. The first few weeks were normal. We painted Caleb's room blue, unpacked boxes, and I started mowing the lawn. The property was shaped weird. A big open field out front, but the backyard sloped down into a dense patch of woods. It was beautiful in the fall, all those red and yellow leaves. The only thing that struck me as odd was a concrete slab in the backyard, about 20 feet from the back door. It was about 8 feet by 8 feet, with a rusty iron ring set into the center. I figured it was an old foundation for a shed or something. I told myself I'd pull it out in the spring. Caleb started having trouble sleeping about a month in. He'd wake up screaming around 2 or 3 in the morning. Not nightmares, he said. He said he heard a man talking. I'd go into his room, stand by his bed, and listen. The house was dead silent. I told him it was the wind in the trees, or maybe the house settling. Houses settle, that's what I told him. He'd nod and go back to sleep, but the next night, the same thing. Then Sarah started complaining about the smell. She said it was strongest in the hallway near the back door. A smell like wet dirt mixed with something metallic. I didn't smell anything at first, but after a few days, I did. It got worse. It got to the point where we kept the back door closed and put a towel at the bottom. We thought maybe there was a gas leak or maybe a dead animal under the house. I called a guy to check for gas. He found nothing. I crawled under the house myself with a flashlight. All I saw was dirt, old pipes, and spider webs. No animal. The smell kept getting stronger. It wasn't just by the back door anymore. It was in the kitchen, in the living room. One night, we were watching TV, and Caleb was playing on the floor with his trucks. He stopped and looked toward the back window. He didn't cry. He just went completely still. I asked him what was wrong. He pointed to the window and said, "He's out there again." I got up and looked. I flipped on the porch light. The backyard was empty. Just the grass, the edge of the woods, and that concrete slab with the iron ring. I pulled the blinds shut and told him to go play. But I started watching the slab after that. I'd look out the kitchen window while I made coffee. It never moved. It was just a slab. But the smell was getting into everything. Our clothes smelled like it. It was a thick, heavy smell, like you could almost taste it. Sarah said she couldn't take it anymore. She said we had to find the source. That Saturday, I decided to get a crowbar and see if I could pry up the slab. It wasn't a slab, though. Once I started digging around the edges, I realized it was a door. A thick concrete door set into a concrete frame that went down into the ground. It had a heavy-duty lock on it, but the lock was old and rusted. A few hits with a sledgehammer and it broke off. The iron ring was the handle. I hooked the crowbar through it and pulled. It took all my strength. The door made a sucking sound, like a vacuum seal breaking, and slowly swung open. The smell that came out of that hole made me stumble backward. It was the smell from the house, but 1,000 times worse. It was the smell of wet earth and rust and something else, something I don't know how to describe. It was the smell of being deep underground. I grabbed a flashlight and looked down. I saw a ladder, wooden rungs bolted to the concrete wall, leading down into the dark. I yelled down, "Hello?" My voice echoed back. No other answer. I told myself I was just going to look. I told myself it was just an old root cellar. I went down the ladder. Each rung felt solid. The air got cooler and thicker with every step down. At the bottom, there was a short hallway with dirt floor. My flashlight beam hit a metal door at the end of the hall. It was like a bank vault door, but smaller. It was open, just a crack. I pushed it with my foot. It swung open on silent hinges. I was in a room built out of concrete. It was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There was a small, filthy mattress in one corner. There was a bucket in another corner that I didn't want to look at too close. And there was a chain bolted to the wall. The chain had a heavy leather cuff at the end, like for a dog, but bigger. The metal ring on the wall looked new, not old like the rest of the place. There was a stack of old water jugs against the wall, empty, and there were marks on the walls. Not writing, scratch marks, long, deep furrows in the concrete, like someone had been trying to dig their way out with their bare hands. My first thought was to get out. My second thought was to call the police. I scrambled back up the ladder, my hands slipping on the rungs. I burst out into the fresh air and slammed the concrete door shut. I ran into the house and told Sarah to take Caleb and go to her mother's. I didn't explain, I just told her to go. She saw my face and she went. She grabbed Caleb and was in the car in 2 minutes. After they left, I called the county sheriff. I told them I found a bunker under my backyard. They said they'd send someone out. I sat on my back porch, staring at that concrete door, waiting. The sun was starting to go down. An hour passed, then another. No sheriff. I called again. They said they had a major incident on the other side of the county and it would be a while. That's when I heard it, a low, muffled sound coming from under the concrete door. It wasn't talking, it was more like a moan, a long, steady, tired-sounding moan. I backed away from the porch into the kitchen. I kept my eyes on the slab. The sound stopped. For about 5 minutes, nothing, just the wind in the trees. Then I saw the iron ring move. It shifted just a little. Then it shifted again, harder. The whole concrete door started to shake. It was like something was pushing from underneath. I grabbed a kitchen knife, which was stupid. What was I going to do with a kitchen knife? The door lifted an inch, then 2 inches. I could see a sliver of darkness under it. Then fingers appeared. They were long, pale fingers caked with dirt. They gripped the edge of the concrete door and started to pull. The door was heavy, but the thing was lifting it. I could hear it grunting with the effort. The door rose up, 6 inches, a foot. I stood there in the kitchen, frozen, watching. A man pulled himself out. He was thin, way too thin. His clothes were torn and dirty. His hair was long and matted. He moved slowly, like every bone in his body hurt. He got to his knees, then to his feet. He just stood there in the middle of my backyard, swaying. He turned his head and looked right at me through the kitchen window. His face was hollow. His eyes were dark, sunk deep into his head. He stared at me. Then he started walking toward the house. Not running, not charging, just a slow, steady walk. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I backed away from the porch. I heard his feet on the back porch steps. I heard him try the door. It was locked. He didn't knock. He just stood there. I ran to the front door to get out, but when I opened it, he was already there. He had walked around the house. He was standing on my front lawn 10 feet away. He tilted his head like a dog trying to understand something. I slammed the front door and locked it. I ran to the back again, but I could see him through the living room window, walking around to the back again. He was circling the house. I went to Caleb's room. I grabbed his baseball bat from the corner. I stood in the middle of the hallway listening. The house was quiet again. No moaning, no footsteps. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. I started to think maybe he'd gone. Maybe he was just a confused, lost person. I was lowering the bat when I heard a crash from the basement. He didn't go through a door. He found the basement window, the small one by the foundation. He broke it and crawled in. I heard him moving around down there, knocking over boxes. Then I heard him on the basement stairs. Each step creaked. He was coming up. I stood at the basement door holding the bat. The doorknob started to turn. It turned slowly, then stopped. I could hear him breathing on the other side, a low, ragged breath. He pushed the door. I pushed back, putting all my weight against it. He was stronger than me, even in that state. The door pushed open an inch, then two. I could see his eye in the crack, just his eye, staring at me. I shoved the door closed and ran. I ran out the front door and didn't stop. I got in my truck and drove to the end of the driveway. I called the sheriff again from the road. I told them a man was in my house. They showed up 20 minutes later with 4 cars. They went in. I waited. After a while, a deputy came out and walked over to my truck. He asked me if anyone else had a key. I said no. He said there was no one inside. They searched the whole house, the basement, the attic. No one. They went out to the bunker. The concrete door was still open. They went down. They said there was no one down there either. The room was empty. Just the mattress, the bucket, the chain. The deputy asked me if I'd been drinking. I told him no. He looked at me like he didn't believe me. He said they'd file a report. Then they left. I didn't go back inside that night. I slept in my truck. The next morning, I went in to get some clothes. The basement door was closed. I opened it and went down. Everything was how I left it. Boxes, tools, a few old chairs. But by the basement window, there was a pile of dirt and leaves. And on the floor, leading from the window to the stairs, there were wet footprints. They weren't mine. They led up the stairs, stopped at the basement door, and then they didn't go anywhere else. They just stopped at the door, like he stood there for a while, and then turned around and went back down. I looked at the window. It was still broken, but pressed into the dirt on the windsill, right at the edge, was a handprint, a small one, not the man's, a child's handprint. I sold the house to a developer 3 weeks later. I didn't tell him about the bunker. I just wanted it gone. We moved to a townhouse in Hershey. No yard, no basement. Caleb still wakes up sometimes. He doesn't talk about a man anymore. Now he says he hears a tapping. He says it comes from inside the walls. He says it taps 4 times, then stops. I've checked. There's nothing there. But last night, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, and I heard it. 3 taps coming from the wall behind the mirror. I stood there, toothbrush in my hand, and I waited. Then there was a 4th tap. I put my hand on the wall. It was cold, colder than it should be. And I swear, for a second, I felt something push back from the other side.
The house was in a subdivision outside of Austin, Texas. All the houses looked the same, beige brick with black shutters, but ours had a pool. That's why my wife Megan wanted it. We had just moved from Michigan for my job, and she said if she was going to live in the Texas heat, she needed a pool. Our daughter, Lily, was 8. She was excited to have her own room for the first time. The previous owners left in a hurry. I remember the realtor, a woman named Carol, kept saying they were motivated sellers. They dropped the price 3 times before we made an offer. When we did the final walkthrough, the house was empty except for one thing. In the guest bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, there was a heavy wooden dresser pushed against the wall. It was old, with weird carvings on the front. I told Carol to have them remove it. She said she'd mention it. Closing day came and the dresser was still there. I was annoyed, but Megan said it was fine. She said we could use it for storage, so I left it. I shoved it against the wall and figured I'd deal with it later. The first few weeks were just unpacking and getting settled. The neighborhood was quiet. We had a pool guy come once a week to clean the pool. His name was Eddie. He was a young guy, maybe 20, with a faded tattoo on his arm. He was friendly. He asked me how we liked the house. I said it was great. He nodded, looked at the back of the house, and asked if we ever had any trouble with the guest room. I asked him what he meant. He just shrugged and said the last people kept it locked. Then he went back to cleaning the pool. I didn't think much of it. A lot of people lock rooms they don't use. But a couple weeks later, I noticed the door to the guest room was closed. I always left it open to let air circulate. I asked Megan if she closed it. She said no. I asked Lily. She said no. I opened it and looked around. Nothing was different. The dresser was against the wall. The blinds were closed. I left the door open and went back to watching TV. The next day, it was closed again. This time, I made sure. I left it open when I went to work. When I came home, it was closed. I told Megan again. She thought I was messing with her. I told her I wasn't. She said maybe the air pressure from the AC was pushing it shut. I wanted to believe that, but the door didn't swing easily. It was heavy, solid wood. You had to turn the knob to close it all the way. I started paying attention. A few nights later, I got up to get a glass of water around 2 a.m. The hall was dark. I walked past the guest room and the door was open. I stared at it for a second. I was sure I had closed it before bed. I didn't close it again. I just got my water and went back to bed. The next morning, I looked in the guest room. The dresser had moved. It was no longer flush against the wall. It was pulled out about 6 inches. I could see the wall behind it. The wall looked normal, but there was a line of dust on the floor where the dresser used to be, like it had been dragged. I pushed the dresser back against the wall. It was heavy, but I managed. I checked behind it again. Nothing, just drywall. I went out and bought a door wedge, one of those rubber triangles, and I jammed it under the guest room door to keep it open. I told Megan I was tired of the door closing. She rolled her eyes. That night, I was sitting on the couch watching a game. Megan and Lily were already asleep. I heard a noise from down the hall. It was a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across a wood floor. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I thought it was the house settling. I went to bed. In the morning, I went to check the guest room. The wedge was still under the door was still open, but the dresser was pulled out from the wall again. This time, it was a foot away. I could see the whole wall behind it. There was nothing there, just a blank wall. I was starting to get angry. I thought maybe Lily was playing tricks on me. I asked her at breakfast. She swore she didn't go in there. Her face looked scared when I asked. I dropped it. I put the dresser back. I took the wedge out and closed the door. I put a chair against the door, wedged under the knob so it couldn't be opened from the inside. I told myself that if anything moved in there now, I'd know it was impossible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening. Around 1 a.m., I heard it. The scraping sound, but louder this time. It was coming from the guest room. I got up. I walked down the hall. The chair was still against the door, exactly as I left it. The scraping stopped when I got close. I stood there for a minute, my hand on the chair. I decided I was going to open the door. I moved the chair, turned the knob, and pushed. The dresser was in the middle of the room. It was facing me like someone had turned it around, and the drawers were open, all 3 of them. They were empty, just lined with that old paper. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding. I walked over to the dresser and looked inside each drawer. Nothing. I closed them. I grabbed the dresser to push it back. That's when I saw the back of it. There were words carved into the wood on the back. Someone had scratched them with a knife or something. It said, "Let me out," over and over in different handwriting. Some of them were small, like a kid's writing. Some were bigger, sloppy, like an adult did it in a hurry. I counted at least 20 of them. I let go of the dresser. I walked out of the room and closed the door. I put the chair back. I went to the garage and got my drill and a box of long screws. I went back and screwed the door shut. I put 4 screws into the frame, 2 on the knob side, 2 on the hinge side. I told Megan in the morning that the door was stuck. I said I'd fix it later. She didn't question it. For 2 days, nothing happened. I checked the screws every morning. They were tight. The door didn't move. I started to relax. I called a guy to come haul away the dresser. He said he'd come on Saturday. On Friday night, I was in the living room with Megan. Lily was in her room playing. We were watching a movie. I heard Lily scream. Not a playing scream, a real scream. I ran to her room. She was sitting on her bed, pointing at the closet. She said there was a man in her closet. I opened the closet. It was empty. Clothes, shoes, toys, no man. I told her it was a dream. She was shaking. I let her sleep in our room that night. The next morning, I decided to take the screws out of the guest room and get the dresser out. I wanted it gone. I unscrewed the screws. They came out easy. I opened a door. The dresser was back against the wall. The drawers were closed. It looked exactly how it did when we moved in. I walked over to it. I grabbed it to pull it out, but it wouldn't move. It was like it was bolted to the floor. I tried again, harder, nothing. I went around to the back of it. I looked for the carvings. They were gone. The back of the dresser was smooth, just bare wood, no words. I heard Lily crying from the kitchen. I went out there. Megan was holding her. Lily was pointing at the back door. I looked. There was a handprint on the glass of the back door, a small handprint like a child's. It was on the outside. I went to the door and looked out. The backyard was empty. The pool was still. The fence gate was closed. I opened the back door and looked at the handprint. It wasn't just dirt. It was like something had pressed into the glass from the outside. I wiped it with my sleeve. It came off, but underneath, etched into the glass, was the same word, "Let me out." I turned around. Lily was staring at the guest room hallway. Megan was on the phone. I think she was calling her mom. I walked back down the hall. The guest room door was closed. I hadn't closed it. I opened it. The dresser was in the middle of the room again. The drawers were open, and inside the top drawer was a photograph. It was old, creased, and faded. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. They were standing in front of the house, the same house. The little girl was holding a doll. Her face was blurred out like someone had scratched it away. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in pencil, was an address. It wasn't our address. It was a street I didn't recognize. I put the photo in my pocket. I closed the dresser drawers. I pushed the dresser back against the wall. I went to the kitchen and told Megan I had to run an errand. I drove to the address on the photo. It was a small apartment complex on the other side of town.
I knocked on the door. A woman answered. She was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. I showed her the photo. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. She asked me if I bought the house on Maple Street. I said yes. She said her name was Patricia. She said she used to live there, with her husband and her daughter, Emily. She said they moved out 8 years ago. I asked her about the dresser. She went pale. She told me to come inside. She sat down at her kitchen table and told me that her husband built the dresser. He built it for Emily's room. He was proud of it. But after he built it, things changed. He started spending all his time in Emily's room. He'd lock the door. Emily would cry. Patricia said she didn't want to talk about what he did in there. She said the police got involved. Her husband went away. Emily wouldn't sleep in her room anymore. She said Emily always said there was a man in the walls, a man who tapped and scratched. I asked where Emily was now. Patricia looked at the floor. She said Emily ran away when she was 16. She said she hadn't seen her in 6 years. She said she still looks for her. I drove home. I told Megan we were selling the house. I didn't tell her about the dresser. I just said I hated Texas and I wanted to go back to Michigan. She fought me on it, but I didn't give in. I called a realtor the next day. The day before we moved out, I went into the guest room one last time. The dresser was against the wall. I opened the top drawer. The photo was gone. In its place was a child's hair tie, a pink one. Lily had pink hair ties. I went to Lily's room. She was packing her toys. Her hair was down. I asked her where her hair tie was. She said she didn't know. She said she took it off before bed last night and put it on her nightstand. It wasn't there. I looked at her nightstand. There was a small handprint in the dust. A child's handprint, too small for Lily's hand. I looked at her closet. The door was slightly open. I walked over and opened it. On the back wall of the closet, scratched into the paint, were the words, "Let me out." I closed the closet door. I picked Lily up and carried her out of the room. We left that day. I didn't wait for the movers. I just packed the car and drove. Megan was furious, but I didn't care. We've been in Michigan for 3 months now. Lily has her own room again. She hasn't had any nightmares. She hasn't heard any tapping. I thought we were done with it. But last week, I was cleaning out the garage. I found a box that we must have packed in a hurry. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was the same one from the dresser. The family, the house, the little girl. Only now, the little girl's face wasn't blurred.
It was clear, and she was smiling. I put the photo back in the box and taped it shut. I wrote "Do not open" on it with a marker. I put it on the highest shelf in the garage. I told myself I'd throw it away. Last night, I was in the living room watching TV. Lily was asleep. I heard a noise from the garage, a scraping sound. I went to the door that leads from the house to the garage. I opened it. The garage was dark. I flipped a light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb was out. I stood in the doorway. I could see the box on the high shelf. It was still there, but the shelf underneath it was empty. There was a pink hair tie on the floor, right below the box. I didn't put it there. I closed the door. I locked it. I pushed a chair against it, just like I did with the guest room. I went back to the couch. I'm sitting here now, writing this. The chair is still against the door, but I just heard it. 3 taps, coming from inside the garage. Then a 4th tap. Then a sound I can't stop thinking about. It sounded like a little girl laughing.
We moved to a small town in northern Georgia because my wife, Rachel, got a job at the hospital there. She was a nurse. I worked from home doing IT support. Our son, Owen, was 10. He liked video games and fishing. The house we found was on a dead-end road surrounded by woods. It was an old farmhouse built in the 1970s, but it had been renovated. New roof, new windows, new kitchen. The price was good. The only weird thing was the layout. The house had 3 bedrooms. 2 were normal, side by side. The 3rd bedroom was at the end of a long hallway, separated from the others. It had a door that opened into the living room too, like a pass-through. The realtors said it used to be a home office. I figured I'd use it for my work. I set up my desk in there, my computer, all my stuff. The first week was fine. Owen liked the woods behind the house. He'd go out there with his fishing pole, even though there wasn't a creek. He said he was looking for one. Rachel worked long shifts, so it was usually me and Owen in the evenings. Then I started noticing the wall. In my office, the back wall was different from the others. The drywall was newer, and the texture didn't match. It was a smooth patch in a room full of orange peel. I figured they had patched something. I didn't think about it. About 2 weeks in, I was working late. It was around 11 p.m. Rachel was at the hospital. Owen was asleep. I heard a noise behind me, a scratching sound like a mouse in the wall. I turned around. The back wall. The sound stopped. I went back to work. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Not scratching. It was more like tapping. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. I put my hand on the wall. It felt cold, colder than the other walls. I told myself it was pipes. Old houses have pipes in the walls. I went to bed. The next night, I heard it again. This time louder. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall. I heard something on the other side. It wasn't a mouse. It was a low, slow breathing. I jumped back. I stood there in the dark, listening. Nothing else. I turned on the light. The wall looked normal. I put my ear to it again. Silence. I told Rachel about it the next morning. She said it was probably a raccoon. She said we should call animal control. I called them. A guy came out, looked around the outside of the house. He said there was no access point, no holes, no gaps. He said whatever was making the noise wasn't in the walls. He left. That night, I decided to find out what was behind that wall. I took a hammer and a crowbar from the garage. I went into my office. I put the crowbar against the seam where the new drywall met the old. I pried. The drywall cracked. I pulled a piece off. Behind it was not insulation. There was a door, a small wooden door like a cabinet door, but it was set into the studs. It had a latch on it like a hook and eye, with a padlock. The padlock was old and rusty. I broke the padlock with the crowbar. I unhooked the latch. I opened the door. There was a space behind it. Not a room, more like a crawl space. It was maybe 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide. The floor was dirt. The walls were bare studs, and there was a mattress on the dirt floor. A small mattress, like for a child. There was a blanket on it. There was a plastic bucket in the corner, and on the wall, carved into the wood, were names. Dozens of names. Some were crossed out. I shined my flashlight in. The air smelled like dirt and sweat. I saw a chain bolted to the floor. It had a cuff on the end, like for an ankle. The cuff was empty. I backed out. I called Rachel. She didn't answer. She was in surgery. I called the police. A sheriff's deputy came out. His name was Deputy Cole. He was a heavy guy with a mustache. He looked in the crawl space. He didn't say much. He took pictures. He asked me if I knew the previous owners. I said no. He said he'd look into it. After he left, I boarded up the hole with a piece of plywood. I nailed it over the opening. I didn't want Owen seeing it. I didn't want Rachel seeing it. I told myself it was old. Whatever happened there happened a long time ago. But the tapping came back that night. It wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the crawl space. But the crawl space was sealed. I nailed the plywood myself. I checked the outside of the house. There was no other way in. The tapping was coming from inside that space. I stood by the plywood. The tapping stopped. Then I heard a voice, a man's voice, low and rough. It said, "You let me out." I ran out of the room. I closed the door. I put a chair against it. I sat in the living room the rest of the night with a baseball bat.
The next morning, I went back in. The plywood was still nailed in place. I took the nails out and pulled it off. The crawl space was empty. The mattress was still there. The bucket was still there. But there was something new. On the back wall of the crawl space, written in the dirt, were words. "I'm still here." I called Deputy Cole again. He came back. He looked at the words. He looked at me. He asked if I was sure no one had been in the house. I told him I was sure. He said he'd talk to the neighbors. He left. That afternoon, Rachel came home. I told her everything. She was quiet. She didn't want to stay in the house, but we didn't have anywhere else to go. We had a lease. We had payments. She said we should talk to the neighbors ourselves. We went to the house next door. An old woman named Gladys answered. She'd lived there for 40 years. I asked her about the previous owners. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "The Harpers. They lived there for 15 years. The husband, Bill, he was a quiet man. They had a daughter, little girl named Emma. She disappeared when she was 7. They said she ran off into the woods. They searched for weeks, never found her. I asked her when that was. She said 12 years ago. She said Bill Harper died a few years later. Heart attack. His wife moved away. She said the house was empty for a long time. Then a company bought it, fixed it up, sold it to us. I went back home. I sat in my office and looked at the crawl space. I thought about Emma. I thought about the names carved in the wall. I thought about the voice that said, "You let me out." I called the sheriff's office again. I asked to speak to Deputy Cole. They said he was off duty. I left a message. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Rachel was asleep next to me. I heard a sound, not from the office, from Owen's room. I got up. I walked down the hall. Owen's door was open. I looked in. His bed was empty. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the living room. Empty. I ran to the office. The plywood was on the floor. The crawl space door was open. I shined my flashlight in. Owen was sitting on the mattress. He was looking at the wall. His back was to me. I said his name. He didn't turn around. I climbed in. I grabbed his shoulder. He turned his head. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking at something behind me.
There was a man standing in the doorway of the crawl space. He was blocking the way out. He was thin, with gray skin and black eyes. His clothes were old, like from the 1990s. He smiled at me. His teeth were yellow. He said, "You let me out." I pushed Owen toward the door. The man didn't move. I shoved him. He was solid. He grabbed my arm. His hand was cold. He pulled me toward him. I punched him in the face. It was like punching a wall. He didn't flinch. He just smiled wider. Owen started screaming. Rachel's voice came from the living room. She was calling our names. The man looked toward the sound. He let go of me. He stepped back into the office. I grabbed Owen and pushed him out of the crawl space. I crawled out after him. The man was standing in the middle of the office. Rachel ran in. She saw him. She froze. He looked at her. Then he looked at Owen. He tilted his head. He said, "I need another one." I grabbed Owen and ran. Rachel ran behind us. We ran out the front door. We got in the car and drove. I didn't look back. We drove to a motel on the highway. Rachel was shaking. Owen was crying. I called the police again. This time, 6 cars showed up at the house. They went in. They came out. They said there was no one there. They said the crawl space was empty. They said there was no evidence of anyone being in the house. Deputy Cole came to the motel. He said they'd keep a patrol car near the house. He told me to stay away. We stayed at the motel for 3 days. We went back to the house to get our things. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to. I went in with 2 deputies. The office was empty. The plywood was on the floor. The crawl space door was closed. I opened it. The mattress was gone. The bucket was gone. The names carved in the wall were gone. The wall was smooth, like it had been sanded clean. I grabbed our clothes, Owen's toys, my computer. We left. We never went back. We moved to an apartment in Atlanta. Rachel transferred to a different hospital. Owen started a new school. For a month, things were normal. Then Owen started sleepwalking. I'd find him standing in the kitchen in the middle of the night, staring at the wall. I'd lead him back to bed. He never remembered it. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. Owen was standing at the foot of my bed. He was staring at me. His eyes were open. I said his name. He didn't answer. He just pointed at the wall behind me. I turned around. There was a handprint on the wall. It wasn't Owen's. It was an adult handprint, pressed into the paint from the inside. The fingers were long. The palm was wide. I looked back at Owen. He was smiling, the same smile the man had. He said, "You let me out." I grabbed him. I shook him. His eyes went normal. He started crying. He asked why I was holding him.
I took him back to his room. I put him in bed. I sat in his room until the sun came up. I don't know what to do. The handprint is still on the wall. I tried to paint over it. It bled through the next day. I tried to cut out the drywall. Behind it, there's another wall. And behind that wall, I can hear breathing. I hear it right now. I'm writing this in the living room. I can hear it from Owen's room. Slow, steady breathing. And every few minutes, 3 taps.